Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a mystery horror film, The Eye. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The film begins at night with kids throwing stones at a woman, calling her Bruja, which translates to a witch. Before jumping off the chair to kill herself, the woman takes a wire, makes a noose, and repeatedly pleads with someone not to hurt her. However, a shadowy figure snarls at her, and the woman looks at her fearfully before life takes her last breath. The scene then transitions to Sydney, an accomplished classical violinist from Los Angeles who was blind at the young age of 5. Since then, Sydney has been dependent on her other senses, which were heightened over time. After her rehearsal, Sydney is accompanied by her apartment building's doorman as the rain pours harshly outside. Later that night, Sydney stares outside her windows, listening intently to the sound of raindrops dropping at the glasses, while her mind wanders about her operation tomorrow. The following day, after her successful cornea transplant, Sydney is visited by another patient in the hospital, Alicia. Because of the bandages, Sydney cannot see her, but she can hear clearly. The little girl suffers from a brain tumor, and she's soon going to have surgery to remove it. Alicia quickly changes the subject and tells Sydney that she will return so she can take a look at her. After that, Alicia returns to her room. Later that day, the doctor carefully removes Sydney's bandages and helps her open her eyes. It's still blurry, but as she opens her eyes, Sydney notices a black figure in the room passing by her sister. Unbeknownst to her, only 4 people are in that room, including her and the nurse. There's a little burning sensation in her eyes, but the doctor reassures her that it's normal since she's still adjusting, and they will be sensitive to light until she fully recovers. Later that day, the sister apologizes to Sydney, blaming herself for causing her blindness because of a silly mistake of playing with firecrackers. Sydney comforts her sister and reminds her that it's not her fault. Later that night, Alicia returns to her, but Sydney can't see her clearly. Alicia offers to take her to the park outside before running to her room after the nurse catches her. Hours later, Sydney wakes up in the middle of the night and notices a shadowy figure taking the old woman patient beside her. Sydney follows them to the hallway, but the old woman vanishes into thin air before her eyes, leaving her bewildered and awake all night. The next morning, the staff informs her that the old woman passed away last night. Later that day, Sydney asks the doctor about her donor, but he responds that it's confidential. He informs her that he will refer her to a specialist to recover quickly, since she's been blind for decades. The following day, before they leave the hospital, the sister takes a picture of Sydney and Alicia. As they return to her apartment, the whole building surprises Sydney with her successful operation. However, their voices and blurry faces are too much for her. Later that night, Sydney goes to the kitchen to get some water when she hears a continuous ticking sound. She follows the sound, leading to the convection oven where a fire suddenly emerges out of nowhere, burning her face. Sydney jumps off the bed and caresses her face as she unexpectedly experiences a nightmare. As she calms down, she cannot help but notice that her apartment is changing, but it quickly returns to normal, as if there was nothing there. Sydney clicks the clock on her bedside table, telling her that it's 1:06 in the morning. Later that day, she goes to the specialist the doctor referred her to, Paul. He informs her that her test results indicate nothing wrong with her. However, she will be adjusting to her surroundings now that she can see, which most of the time will make her confused. She can't really trust her eyes for a while, but Paul is there to help her see the real world. While alone in her apartment, Sydney notices someone passes by her door. So she was outside and finds a boy in a raincoat who asks her about his report card. The boy shivers in fear because his father will get mad if he doesn't have his report card. Sydney turns around to check the hallway, but the boy has completely vanished when she looks back. The following day, after their rehearsal to comfort her about performing for the first time with her eyesight back, the orchestra conductor takes Sydney out. He excuses himself to get their order, and while waiting for him, Sydney experiences a strange encounter with a woman. She talks to Sydney with firmness in her eyes, and Sydney repeatedly turns around, thinking that the woman's talking to someone behind her. Sydney's confusion heightens as the woman keeps talking to her, but then she falls out of the chair as the woman charges at her. Sydney accidentally hits a waiter, causing a mess and a commotion. Sydney scaredly shares with the conductor about the woman, but she suddenly vanishes, so Sydney excuses herself and leaves. Later that night, as the clock hits 1:06 a.m., Sydney dreams of the shadowy figure and a little girl inside a burning vehicle calling for help, and the boys throwing stones at a woman. Sydney wakes up from her strange dream and immediately notices that her apartment's changing again. She leaves the bed and slowly approaches her walls, which keep changing. However, she accidentally knocks on the chair, and the walls return to normal. The following day, Sydney goes to Paul, who informs her that her latest test results indicate there's nothing abnormal to her. Sydney insists that she's seeing things that aren't real, but Paul responds that maybe it's her mind playing tricks on her, which highly offends her. Sydney returns home, and while enjoying her new television, she notices something. She turns it off and goes to the front door as smokes come through underneath it. Sydney looks through the peephole and finds a man standing in the mist. He vanishes quickly before reappearing and charging at her door. Sydney backs away, but she gets surrounded by fog. She begins to cough as her surroundings change and finds herself in a burning factory. Sydney screams in horror as a burning man holds her down and grabs her arm. Suddenly, everything changes, and she sees the little girl in the burning vehicle again. Sydney catches her breath as she wakes up and witnesses the marks on her arm disappear. Terrified by her dreams, Sydney goes out and calls her sister, but her message goes straight to voicemail. Too preoccupied with the recent events, Sydney doesn't notice the woman walking across her. She only notices her when the woman passes through her. Both women seem appalled by what just happened, but when they hear someone yelling to people to call 911, they both realize something. The woman's already dead from a car accident. Sydney then sees the shadowy figure again, vanishing with the woman's soul. Mortified, Sydney runs away from the scene and gets inside a Chinese restaurant. She sits at an empty table and contacts Paul, instructing him to come over to the restaurant. After that, she breaks down into tears, overwhelmed by the things happening to her. She calms herself down and tries to place an order, but the waitress ignores her. Suddenly, strange things occur again. Cracks start to form on the glass windows, and her table begins to burn. These things happen quickly, but they're enough to freak her out even more. Sydney notices that the customers haven't looked at her even once. She then observes the cook, and before she can warn him, an explosion breaks out, causing a huge fire. Sydney quickly covers herself, but when she doesn't feel anything, she looks around and finds the whole restaurant burnt into ashes. Right then, Paul appears and informs her that a fire broke out in the restaurant weeks ago, and 5 people were killed. Mystified, Sydney shares what has been happening to her from the shadowy figure she first saw in the hospital, who escorts people away after they die. However, Paul dismisses her franticness and suggests that her brain cannot differentiate imagination from reality. Nevertheless, Sydney knows that what she's seeing and experiencing are all real. She enters her building, but when she's about to enter the elevator, she finds a strange old man standing in the corner. She checks the CCTV at the front desk, and the elevator is empty. A couple walks in and enters the elevator. She lets them first and enters the second elevator, upon checking that there's nobody there. However, as it closes, Sydney notices the old man's reflection through the steel doors. He turns around and slowly approaches her, while his feet are off the ground. Sydney keeps still terrified while waiting for her floor. Just as he's centimeters away from her, Sydney reaches her floor, so she runs her way out of there when she runs into the boy in the raincoat. He repeatedly asks her about his report card, but Sydney ignores him until she turns around and finds the boy sitting at the edge of the window. Sydney runs to him, but the boy lets himself fall. Despite that, Sydney breaks the window and looks down to find the ground empty. She walks away when she hears the boy's voice again and sees him behind her. Sydney rushes her way to her apartment and shuts it before the boy can enter. Because of the strange and terrifying things she experienced within the last hours, Sydney breaks all the lamps and lights in her apartment and shuts the blinds, hiding in the darkness. Sydney keeps herself away from any light until Paul comes in with the help of the doorman. Paul finds her in her bed with her scarf wrapped around her eyes. He opens the windows and removes her scarf and then takes her to the hospital to get her cut sewn up. While she's getting treated, Paul recommends to the doctor that they keep her overnight. Later that night, Sydney wakes up upon hearing Alicia's voice, who informs her that the golf ball in her head's gone. After that, she leaves the room, so Sydney follows her to the hallway. Before she comes with the shadowy figure, Alicia reassures Sydney not to be scared because the world is beautiful. Sydney tries to stop her, but Alicia vanishes with the shadowy figure. The following day, the sister gives Sydney a letter that Alicia made before her surgery. As she opens the letter, Sydney fails to recognize herself until her sister tells her it's her in the picture. Sydney immediately looks at herself in the mirror, but finds someone else's reflection. She repeatedly turns off and on the lights, but the woman in the reflection isn't hers. Because of this, Sydney takes things into her hands and researches the things happening to her. She stumbles across a medical term called cellular memory, which proposes that the body can store memories. So if a person chooses to be a donor, its living tissue has a tendency to transfer its memories to the recipient, and there are recorded cases of this. So after her research, Sydney immediately informs Paul about it and convinces him to tell her who her donor was. However, Paul refuses as it's confidential, and he can lose his license. Later that day, when a woman comes out of the elevator, Sydney notices the boy in the raincoat behind her. The woman sees Sydney's uncomfortableness and realizes that her son is in the building. Sydney remains still in the corner, somewhat relieved. Later that night, Sydney checks herself in the mirror, but she sees a different woman's reflection again. She asks her what she wants and what she can do to help her. The woman shows her the same nightmares she's been having. In frustration, Sydney breaks the mirror into pieces, but she can still see the woman in the shards. She rushes out of the bathroom and convinces her sister to let her handle and solve the mystery behind her donor's eyes. The following day, when she's about to start her investigation, Paul stops her and gives her the information about her donor. Accompanied by Paul, Sydney travels to Mexico, where her cornea donor, Anna, was originally from. They successfully track down Anna's mother, who lives with her caregiver inside a vandalized house full of the word bruja. Anna's mother recognizes her daughter's eyes with just one look at her. She informs them that her burnt face was from a fire in the factory she worked. It turns out people in their town were afraid of Anna because she could see the spiritual world and their death. People called her a witch for her unwanted gift. Suddenly, Sydney sees the shadowy figure behind the mother, so she instructs Paul to call an ambulance, confusing them. However, the mother suddenly loses her energy, and the caregiver informs them she's experiencing a heart attack. Paul and the caregiver take her to the nearby hospital, while Sydney stays at the house. While there, Sydney realizes that the walls changing in her apartment were in Anna's room. She asked Anna to show her what she wants her to see. A flashback shows a frantic Anna rushing to the factory and warning everyone about the premonition she saw. She repeatedly warns them, but they dismiss her and throw her out of the factory because of her reputation. Before she's thrown out, Anna calls out to her mother. Soon enough, a massive fire breaks out in the factory, trapping almost all employees inside. Fortunately, Anna's mother survives, but the guilt of not saving those people get the best of Anna. People hate her even more, and even the kids throw her stones, calling her a witch. The flashback ends, and Sydney goes to the basement, where she tries to stop Anna from hanging herself. Sydney holds her in her arms and breaks down into tears as she tells her that those people's death was not her fault. As Anna leaves in peace, Paul watches Sydney talk to her in silence. After this, Paul informs Sydney that Anna's mother died before driving away. However, they are caught in traffic congestion caused by a police chase on the other side of the border. As she wakes up from sleep, Sydney notices the little girl in her vision in the caravan next to them. She gets out of the car and looks at the girl through the windows, and she's right, it's her in the vision. Paul takes her away from the vehicle as she's creeping out the girl. However, Sydney suddenly runs ahead and gets onto a bus, where she finds a gas truck with plate number 106. She informs Paul that it's what Anna wants her to see, to save these people that are about to die from an accident, so she wouldn't end up like her. Sydney begs him to believe her, as she sees the shadowy figures on every person on that bus. This time, Paul finally believes her, and he helps her get all of the people on that bus and other people from their vehicles. They cause a commotion and panic among these people, and just in time, the car chase reaches their area, colliding with the tank truck, igniting leaking gasoline in the process. Sydney sees the little girl trapped in the vehicle, screaming for help. Paul breaks open the window, and Sydney carries her outside while they run to safety. As they do so, the tank truck explodes, causing a chain explosion. Sydney hides the girl behind a car, but then flying glass fragments enter her eyes, making her blind again. After that, Sydney is taken to the hospital. The film ends with Sydney back in Los Angeles, where she performs as the lead violinist, with a more optimistic view of her blindness. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.